Have you ever wondered, how is it that we got to a place where we have to debate what a woman is, or whether or not boys should be playing in girls' sports, or whether a person's sex, being male or female, can change at a moment's notice, or even be non-binary? How did we get to a point where we have to spend so much time debating questions that were totally obvious just a few years ago? And questions with answers that are still obvious to the overwhelming majority of Americans. How did a lunatic, fringe set of beliefs take over the mainstream and gain so much political capital inside Washington? And more importantly, what are the real-world effects of this madness? Well, at the center of that conversation is a landmark civil rights law called Title IX. My name's Candice Jackson. I'm an attorney, I'm a mom, I worked in the Trump education department, and I'm on the front lines in the fight to save women's sports, save our schools, save America's sanity. In 1972, Congress passed a civil rights law called Title IX. The purpose of the law was to ensure that no person would be excluded from educational programs or activities on the basis of sex. Over the years, you've probably heard about Title IX most in the context of college sports, where some colleges were forced to add or eliminate certain programs to make sure there was an equitable distribution of resources between men's and women's athletic teams. So, for example, Title IX requires that female and male student athletes receive athletic scholarship dollars proportionate to their participation, and that resources be divided in a fair manner. And while implementation has caused some controversy over the years, there's no doubt that Title IX has helped level the playing field for female athletes over the last 50 years. Always with the understanding that a girls' team is for girls. Title IX doesn't just apply to sports, though. The law applies to every aspect of K through 12 and higher education, including course offerings, counseling, health services, access to campus facilities. And so here's where it gets interesting. The Title IX statute prohibits discrimination based on sex, but doesn't actually define sex, because it was so obvious decades ago. Congress didn't even find it necessary to define in a law that humans are immutably male or female, until now, when the Biden-Harris administration is exploiting that lack of definition as part of their Title IX rewrite, expanding sex discrimination to include gender identity. What's this mean? Well, it can mean whatever you want it to mean, because the very concept of gender identity amounts to everyone getting to choose what sex they are, and everyone else being forced to pretend to believe it. Any student can proclaim their sex being anything they want. Male, female, both, neither, and take advantage of any benefits that come with that declaration. So, for example, a biological male claiming to be a woman would be able to access women's restrooms, locker rooms, play on girls' sports teams, take a scholarship dedicated to a female athlete, even demand so-called preferred pronouns be used for them, and the Biden-Harris Title IX framework would be standing in their corner, ready to enforce those whims. So remember, schools receiving federal funding would have to adhere to these new education department guidelines or risk serious consequences. Even if your local school district or state college wanted to stand up to the insanity and classify students as male or female based on reality and biology, those schools will be risking not just losing federal dollars, but also being piled on with investigations, audits, court battles, and negative press. For 50 years, Title IX has been committed to ending sex-based discrimination. But now the woke left wants to overhaul the whole purpose of the law to fulfill more of their far-left, postmodern Marxist fantasies. Title IX, once seen as a high-water mark for women's rights and goals of equality between the sexes, is now being turned upside down by the same bureaucrats and activists who just 5 minutes ago would lecture us about the need to protect women's rights. If you're thinking to yourself, this doesn't make any sense, you're right, and you're not alone. It makes no sense on the merits. These far-left bureaucrats are operating through fear and force, threatening careers, grant dollars, and public image and reputations against anyone who dares to call out this craziness. And while the left-wing mob wants you to believe that this is about equal rights of some kind, the reality is exactly the opposite. The proponents of overhauling Title IX this way actually want to take away rights from young women and girls by denying them a fair playing field in sports, denying them basic safety and privacy measures. In short, by denying that girls and women even exist as a category distinct from boys and men. Now, the good news is Republican attorney generals are fighting back right now, making their cases in court. 26 states have filed suit against the Biden-Harris Title IX overhaul. They're arguing that the Education Department is operating outside of statutory authority in a way that's arbitrary and capricious, in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, and in violation of the Constitution, whether it's the Spending Clause, the First Amendment, 5th, 10th, 14th Amendments. And most importantly, they're arguing that the Biden-Harris rule would gut the very protections that this law was enacted to protect. Earlier this summer, injunctions were issued in federal courts stopping these new radical rules from going into effect, for now. And back in the middle of August, the Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision, voted to reject a Biden-Harris administration emergency request to let them enforce portions of the Title IX rule that relate to gender identity. So while the Department of Education is busy focusing on this bizarre obsession with coddling biological men and boys who want to identify as girls, it shows no concern for the women and girls who are forced to suffer the consequences. And it's all in direct defiance of 5 decades of progress made by women and girls as a result of Title IX discrimination protections. So where do we go from here? Well, first off, with a Republican majority in Congress, lawmakers need to make it a top priority to update Title IX to define sex and recognize that girls and women need and deserve female-only spaces. This can stop future executive branches from trying these dirty tricks all over again. And furthermore, with the Supreme Court's recent decision overturning so-called Chevron deference, these regulations can be scrapped immediately when the full case is heard on the merits. So look, there's a lot we've covered because there's a lot at stake. When you hear about gender identity, it's about the factually false belief that humans can choose and change their sex. It's about denying basic reality, and it's girls and women who suffer most when society pretends to believe these lies. And don't fall for the woke left's tactic of accusing anyone who rejects the false notion of gender identity as being anti-gay. In fact, belief in gender identity is itself very anti-gay. And I say that as a lesbian, horrified to witness this gender identity craze trying to deny people's sexual orientation. So remember, at its core, this is about calling a boy and a girl. It's about saying out loud what's always been true and obvious, and doing it unapologetically and unafraid. So if you care about your kids, if you care about your schools, if you want to restore common sense and simple reality into our laws and policies, then I urge you, stay in the fight, stay motivated, stay engaged, because together we're one day closer to winning. Winning in courtrooms, winning in classrooms, winning over public opinion. I'm Candice Jackson, and this is why I'm outspoken.